Twilight's Last Gleaming by Alex Nance. Episode 2, Chapter 1. The cargo plane touched down on a cracked runway in the dark, the wheels biting uneven pavement that hadn't seen proper maintenance in years. The airstrip sat on the outskirts of a town in eastern Romania whose name none of them had heard before the briefing folder landed in their laps, and which most of them had already forgotten. The kind of place that existed on maps and in transit logs and nowhere else that mattered. That was the point. The rear ramp lowered and the 6 of them filed out into cold air that carried the smell of diesel and wet earth. The sky was overcast and starless, the only light coming from a pair of sodium lamps mounted on poles at the edge of the tarmac, their orange glow barely reaching the tree line 200 yards out. The plane's engines were still cycling down, the whine of them filling the space and then thinning until all that was left was wind. Colvin stood at the bottom of the ramp and took in the surroundings with the slow, deliberate scan of a man who processed environments the way most people process sentences. His eyes moved from the tree line to the single-access road, from the road to the low cinder block building at the edge of the strip, from the building to the rusted fuel truck parked beside it. He finished the circuit and gave a single nod to no one in particular. "All right, get the gear off and let's get inside," Colvin said. The team moved without discussion, falling into the work with the efficiency of people who had loaded and unloaded equipment in enough terrible places that the process had become mechanical. Milligan grabbed the heaviest crate first, because Milligan always grabbed the heaviest thing first, hauling it off the ramp with the ease of someone who genuinely did not understand that normal people used dollies. Delgado shouldered 2 bags and a weapons case, managing to look inconvenienced by how little there was to carry. Knox moved past both of them without a word, a single bag over one shoulder, and walked straight toward the building to clear it before anyone else got there. Whitlock pulled his own gear from the stack and slung it across his back, then grabbed the communications equipment case with both hands and started down the ramp. The case was heavy enough to shift his center of gravity, and he adjusted his grip twice before finding something that worked. Voss came down beside him carrying considerably less, his attention already elsewhere, his eyes on the access road and whatever lay beyond the tree line. "Charming place," Voss said. "It's not supposed to be charming," Whitlock said. "No, I'm aware," Voss said. "I'm just noting that it isn't." The cinder block building turned out to be a 2-room structure that had served at various points in its life as a maintenance office, a storage depot, and most recently, nothing at all. Knox had gone through both rooms by the time the rest of them arrived, confirming what the empty building had already made obvious. He was leaning against the far wall with his arms crossed when they came through the door, and the look he gave them communicated everything a verbal report would have, plus the additional information that it had not been worth the effort. The front room was wide enough to work in, the floor bare concrete, the walls unpainted block. A metal desk sat against one wall, its surface scarred and stained. 2 folding chairs leaned against the opposite wall. A bare bulb hung from the ceiling on a cord that looked like it predated the building itself. Colvin flipped the switch near the door and the bulb came on, filling the room with a flat, industrial light that made everything look worse. "Home sweet home," Delgado said. "It's got walls and a door. That's more than we had in Kandahar," Colvin said. "Cap, Kandahar had walls and a door. It also had rats the size of house cats," Milligan said. "Those were house cats," Delgado said. "Then somebody needs to have a conversation with those cats, because they were eating things that cats don't eat," Milligan said. Colvin let it run for another beat, then brought them back with a look. The team settled into the room, and the mood shifted, the humor draining out of the air as the work took over. Colvin pulled a map from his pack and spread it across the metal desk, smoothing the creases with both hands. The 6 of them gathered around it. "All right, here's where we are," Colvin said. He tapped a point on the map near the eastern edge of Romania, close enough to the Moldovan border to see it, close enough to Ukraine beyond that to feel it. The proximity to Russia wasn't direct, but the corridor was there, a path through Moldova and Ukraine that could move people, materials, and information in both directions if you knew the right hands to grease. "We're working off what the colonel gave us, which isn't much. The warheads were taken from the sub somewhere in the Barents Sea. That's a long way from here, but the chatter the NSA pulled before we left suggests movement through this region. Someone used this corridor to transit something heavy in the last 72 hours, Colvin said. How solid is the chatter? Voss asked. Colvin looked at Whitlock. Fragments, Whitlock said. 2 intercepted calls between unknowns using a cipher that NSA partially cracked. The content references logistics language consistent with heavy cargo movement, and one of the calls originated from a cell tower in Moldova, about 60 miles northeast of here. That's thin, Voss said. It's what we have, Colvin said. Voss studied the map for a moment, his finger tracing the route from their position to the Moldovan border and beyond. Whatever he was thinking stayed behind his eyes, which was typical of Voss. He processed and presented, and the space between those two things was his alone. I have a contact in Chisinau, Voss said. Arms dealer, mid-level, connected enough to know when hardware moves through the region. If something the size of a nuclear warhead came through his backyard, he'll know about it. How reliable? Colvin asked. He likes money and he doesn't like surprises. We can work with that, Voss said. Colvin nodded and looked around the room. All right, here's how we're going to run this. Voss, take the morning to reach your contact and set up a meeting. Don't push, just open the door. Knox, Milligan, I want a full workup on this building and the surrounding area. Perimeter, sight lines, exit routes, anything we can use if we need to leave in a hurry. Delgado, get the weapons squared away and set up a rotation, Colvin said. Delgado gave a mock salute that carried more enthusiasm than the task warranted. And Whitlock, I need comms up and running as soon as possible. Everything you can pull out of the air. I want to hear about it, Colvin said. Whitlock was already opening the communications case before Colvin finished the sentence. He carried it to the desk and began unpacking the equipment with the particular focus of someone handling things that mattered to them. The case held a signals intercept kit that was compact by military standards and enormous by civilian ones. A nested arrangement of receivers, antennas, and processing hardware that could monitor a wide swath of the electromagnetic spectrum and pull intelligible content from it. It was the kind of equipment that technically didn't exist in the inventory of a unit that technically wasn't here. The others filtered out of the room in ones and twos. Milligan and Knox went out through the back to start the perimeter sweep, their voices fading quickly beyond the door. Delgado headed for the gear pile with a purpose that suggested he intended to have every weapon cleaned, loaded, and staged before the sun came up. Voss lingered for a moment, looking at the map one more time, then folded it into his jacket and left without a word. Colvin stayed. He stood by the door with his arms crossed, watching Whitlock work. The younger man moved through the setup with practiced hands, connecting cables, positioning the antenna array, bringing the receivers online, one at a time. Each piece found its place with the confidence of someone who had done this in worse conditions and darker rooms. How long until you're operational? Colvin asked. 20 minutes for basic monitoring, an hour if you want the full spread, Whitlock said. Start with basic. I want to know what's happening on the frequencies around us before the sun comes up, Colvin said. Whitlock nodded without looking up, his hands continuing to work while his eyes tracked the status lights coming online across the receiver bank. Colvin watched for another moment, something turning over behind his expression that he kept to himself, then pushed off the wall and went outside. The quiet that settled into the room was the particular kind that Whitlock worked best in. The equipment hummed softly around him, the receivers cycling through frequencies in a slow, methodical sweep. Static filled his headset in waves, the dead air of a region that was mostly asleep, punctuated by the occasional crackle of a trucker's radio or a local police dispatch speaking Romanian in the bored tones of a graveyard shift. He adjusted the parameters, narrowing the sweep to the frequency ranges that military and intelligence communications tended to occupy. The static changed character, becoming thinner, more purposeful. He listened for patterns the way other people listen for melodies, the rhythm of transmissions, the spacing between them, the particular quality of encrypted traffic that sounded like nothing and meant everything. An hour passed. The sky outside the single window began to lighten, the sodium lamps on the tarmac losing their authority as gray dawn crept in from the east. Whitlock had filled 3 pages of a notebook with frequency logs, timestamps, and shorthand notes. Most of it was routine. Romanian military traffic, predictable and unremarkable. Moldovan border communications, sparse and disorganized. Ukrainian signals further out, busier. carrying the particular tension of a country that had learned to sleep with one eye open. Then something caught him. A transmission on a frequency that didn't belong to any of the regional military bands he had cataloged. Short, compressed, encrypted with something heavier than standard military-grade protocols. It lasted 4 seconds and originated from somewhere northeast, the bearing consistent with the Moldovan corridor Colvin had identified on the map. Whitlock marked the frequency, the time stamp, and the signal characteristics, then sat very still and waited. 3 minutes later, it came again. Same frequency, same encryption, same duration. A different bearing, shifted slightly east. Moving. Whitlock pulled off the headset and reached for the handheld radio on the desk. "Colvin, you're going to want to hear this," Whitlock said. The response came back immediately, Colvin's voice carrying the alertness of someone who hadn't slept and hadn't planned to. "On my way," Colvin said. 30 seconds later, the door opened and Colvin crossed the room to the desk. Whitlock handed him the headset and played back the recorded transmission. Colvin listened to it twice, his expression giving nothing away, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall that wasn't really what he was looking at. "That's not military," Colvin said. "No, it's not. The encryption is commercial grade but layered, the kind of setup you'd build if you wanted to sound like background noise to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for you. And it's moving," Whitlock said. "Moving where?" Colvin asked. Whitlock turned to the map that Voss had left behind, still spread across the corner of the desk. He traced a line from the first bearing to the second, extending it forward. Southeast, toward the Ukrainian border, or possibly through Moldova and into Ukraine further north. I'd need a few more intercepts to narrow it, but the trajectory is consistent with someone using the corridor," Whitlock said. Colvin stared at the map for a long moment. "Can you break the encryption?" Colvin asked. "Not in the field with what I've got, but I can track the signal. If they keep transmitting on a schedule, I can plot their route in real time," Whitlock said. Colvin straightened up and looked at him. "Then stay on it. Don't lose that signal," Colvin said. He turned and walked to the door, then stopped with his hand on the frame. "Good work, Whitlock," Colvin said. He said it the way he said most things, plain and without emphasis, the words carrying weight because of who was saying them rather than how. Then he was gone, the door pulling shut behind him, and Whitlock was alone again, with the equipment and the static and the faint, encrypted heartbeat of something moving through the dark. He put the headset back on and listened. Chapter 2. Voss left before noon, driving a sedan the contact network had arranged that looked like every other sedan on the road and was meant to. He took the single-access road east without saying much to anyone on his way out, which was Voss's way of saying he was already working. The meeting was set for early evening in Chisinau, which gave him time to cross the border, get into the city, and do whatever it was Voss did before he walked into a room with someone who might or might not be planning to kill him. Whitlock watched the sedan disappear into the tree line from the window of the cinderblock building, then turned back to his equipment. The encrypted signal had transmitted 4 more times since Colvin had left the room that morning, each burst following the same pattern. 4 seconds, heavy encryption, consistent intervals. Whitlock had plotted every bearing on the map, and the trajectory was holding. Whatever was transmitting was moving southeast through the Moldovan corridor at a pace that suggested vehicle travel on secondary roads. Not fast, not slow. The pace of someone who knew where they were going and wasn't in a hurry to get there. He had sent the frequency data and signal characteristics back to Fort Meade through the secure uplink, requesting any pattern matches in the NSA's database. The response had come back in under an hour, which told him 2 things. First, that someone at the other end was paying close attention to anything this team sent home. Second, that the database had nothing. The encryption signature didn't match any known military, intelligence, or criminal communications network on file. Whoever built it had built it from scratch. Whitlock sat with that for a while, turning it over. Building a custom encrypted communication system required resources, technical knowledge, and the kind of operational security that came from either paranoia or experience, usually both. It was the work of someone who had thought about this for a long time. He logged the NSA response and went back to the broader sweep, widening the parameters to pick up regional traffic again. The Romanian and Moldovan frequencies had settled into their daytime patterns. Busier now, the rhythms of bureaucracies and border stations going about their routines. He filtered through it with the practiced ear of someone who could identify the shape of irrelevant information without needing to process its content. Then, buried in the Moldovan border traffic, something snagged his attention. A voice on a frequency used by Moldovan customs officers, speaking Romanian. Whitlock's Romanian was functional rather than fluent, built from a semester of study and several months of operational exposure, enough to follow a conversation if the speakers weren't moving too fast. This one was moving fast. Two officers talking over each other, the audio quality poor, the words clipped by transmission delay. Whitlock closed his eyes and focused. The first voice was complaining. A shipment that had come through a checkpoint 3 days ago, paperwork that didn't add up, a manifest that listed agricultural equipment but required an escort of 4 vehicles. The second voice told the first to stop asking questions. The tone was not a suggestion. There was a pause, and then the first voice asked who had authorized the escort. The second voice said a name that Whitlock didn't catch clearly, something that could have been a surname or a title, and then the transmission cut out. Whitlock replayed it twice, isolating the name as best he could with the equipment he had. The audio was degraded, and the words sat right at the edge of intelligibility, 2 syllables that could have been any number of things. He wrote down 3 possible interpretations and circled the one that felt most likely, then flagged the timestamp and frequency for review. Agricultural equipment requiring a 4-vehicle escort through a Moldovan checkpoint 3 days ago. The timing was right. The route was right. The manifest was wrong in exactly the way it would need to be, wrong if you were moving something that couldn't appear on paper. He reached for his radio. "Colvin, I've got something else. Not the encrypted signal. Different channel, Moldovan customs frequency," Whitlock said. Colvin's response came back measured and quick. "What is it?" Colvin said. "A shipment came through a checkpoint 3 days ago with a bad manifest and a 4-vehicle escort. Agricultural equipment that needed armed cars. The officers who processed it were told not to ask questions," Whitlock said. A brief silence on the other end. "Does the timing line up with the encrypted signal?" Colvin asked. "It's close. If the shipment came through 3 days ago and has been moving at the pace I've been tracking, the positions are consistent. I can't prove they're the same thing, but the corridor matches," Whitlock said. "Keep pulling at it, and let me know if that signal changes behavior," Colvin said. "Copy," Whitlock said. He set the radio down and went back to work, the headset pressing into the sides of his skull in a way that had stopped registering hours ago. The drive to Chisinau took Voss just over 4 hours, the border crossing adding 40 minutes that would have been 10 if the guard hadn't decided Voss's documents deserved a second look. Voss had sat behind the wheel with an expression of patient boredom while the man studied his passport, asked 3 questions about his travel purpose, and eventually handed everything back without finding whatever he'd been hoping to find. Voss thanked him in Romanian that was polished enough to sound native and drove through without looking back. Chisinau was a city that wore its history in layers. Soviet architecture sitting beside newer construction, wide boulevards lined with trees that softened the concrete. Voss navigated it from memory, which meant he had been here before and more than once. He parked the sedan in a lot 2 blocks from the meeting point and walked the rest of the way, taking a route that let him pass the location once from the opposite side of the street before doubling back. The meeting was set for a restaurant in the old quarter, the kind of place with heavy wooden furniture and dim lighting that existed specifically so that conversations held inside, it stayed inside it. Voss arrived 15 minutes early, which was 10 minutes later than his contact's people, who had been watching the entrance since before the restaurant opened for dinner service. He noted 2 of them on the sidewalk without looking directly at either one and went inside. The man he was meeting went by Lugo, which was almost certainly not the name on any document that mattered. He was already seated at a table in the back corner when Voss came through the door, a glass of something amber in front of him, his posture carrying the particular ease of a man who owned the room even though his name wasn't on the lease. He was somewhere north of 50, thick through the shoulders, with a face that had been rearranged at least once by something harder than a conversation. His eyes followed Voss across the restaurant the way a dog follows movement near its food. 2 men flanked the table, standing rather than sitting, their jackets cut in the way that accommodated a shoulder holster without advertising it. They watched Voss with the flat attention of professionals who had been told to watch and not much else. Voss pulled out the chair across from Lugo and sat down without waiting to be invited. "You look well, Lugo," Voss said. "You look like trouble," Lugo said. His English was accented but precise, the words chosen carefully, each one placed where he wanted it. He lifted the glass and took a drink without breaking eye contact. "I'm always trouble. That's why you take my meetings," Voss said. "I take your meetings because you pay," Lugo said. "That too," Voss said. A waiter appeared and Voss ordered without looking at the menu, something local and unremarkable, the kind of order designed to keep a table occupied without drawing attention. The waiter left. Lugo's two men didn't move. "I need to know about a shipment," Voss said. "Many shipments come through this region," Lugo said. This one was special. Heavy cargo, possibly military in nature, moved through Moldova in the last 72 hours. Professional operation, escort vehicles, paperwork that was designed to make people stop asking questions rather than answer them, Voss said. Lugo's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. A stillness that settled into his features the way water settles when you stop disturbing it. He took another drink. "Why do you ask about this?" Lugo said. "Because I'm willing to pay for the answer," Voss said. "Some answers cost more than money," Lugo said. Voss let that sit between them for a moment. The restaurant was quiet around them, a handful of other diners scattered across the room, none of them close enough to hear. The two standing men had shifted their weight slightly, a change so subtle that most people wouldn't have noticed. Voss noticed. "Lugo, I've been doing business with you for 3 years. I've never brought you a problem, and I've always brought you cash. Whatever this is, whatever it's made you nervous about, I'm not here to make it worse," Voss said. "You are here to ask about things that powerful people do not want asked about. That is, by definition, making it worse," Lugo said. "Then give me enough to work with, and I'll make it somebody else's problem," Voss said. Lugo studied him for a long time. The glass turned slowly in his fingers, the amber liquid catching what little light the restaurant offered. Behind him, one of the standing men shifted again, this time enough that the movement of his hand toward his jacket was unmistakable. Voss tracked it without looking, his peripheral vision doing the work his eyes didn't need to. "Something came through," Lugo said. 4 days ago, not 3. Your information is behind." "What kind of something?" Voss asked. "The kind of something that required people I have never seen before to appear at crossings I have controlled for years and tell my people to look the other way. Not ask. Tell," Lugo said. The waiter returned with Voss's food and set it down. Neither man looked at it. "These people, who were they?" Voss asked. "Professional, military bearing, though not in uniform. They spoke Russian among themselves when they thought no one was listening. Their paperwork was perfect, the kind of perfect that only governments or organizations with government-level resources can produce," Lugo said. "How many?" Voss asked. The escort was 4 vehicles, 8 to 12 men total. The cargo was in a single truck, heavy, riding low on its suspension. It came from the north and moved through to the east. I was told in language I don't misunderstand that my curiosity about its contents would be the last curiosity I ever had, Lugo said. Voss sat with that. 8 to 12 men, military bearing, Russian speaking, moving a heavy cargo east through Moldova with enough authority to override the local power structure. It matched everything Whitlock had pulled from the intercepted communications and added a dimension that signals intelligence couldn't provide. These weren't smugglers or criminals. This was an operation run by people who operated above the level where men like Lugo could push back. "Where did it go?" Voss asked. "East, toward Transnistria or through it. Beyond that, I don't know, and I didn't ask. The people who move things through Transnistria are not people I do business with, and they are not people you want to meet without considerably more friends than you appear to have brought," Lugo said. Voss absorbed that without reacting. Transnistria was a breakaway region between Moldova and Ukraine that existed in a diplomatic gray area most of the world preferred not to think about. Russian military had maintained a presence there since the early 90s. If the warheads had been routed through Transnistria, the operational picture had just gotten considerably more complicated. "Anything else?" Voss asked. "One thing," Lugo said. He leaned forward slightly, dropping his voice by a degree. After the shipment passed through, I received a visit. Not the same people. Someone local. Someone who works for people who work for other people. The kind of chain where no one sees the top. This person told me that more shipments would be coming and that my cooperation would be remembered and my questions would not be forgotten. He paused, his eyes steady on Voss's. This is not a single event. Whatever you are chasing, it is ongoing, and the people behind it intend to come through here again, Lugo said. Voss processed that, filing it alongside everything else, the picture assembling itself in pieces that were starting to suggest a shape without quite revealing it. He reached into his jacket, and both of Lugo's men tensed. Voss moved slowly, deliberately, and produced an envelope that he set on the table and slid across. Lugo looked at it, but didn't pick it up. That covers tonight and buys me one more conversation if I need it, Voss said. You should hope you don't need it, Lugo said. Voss stood, leaving the untouched food on the table, and extended his hand. Lugo took it after a moment, the grip firm and brief. Be careful with this, Voss, Lugo said. I have survived a long time by knowing which things are too large to touch. This feels like one of those things. Noted, Voss said. He turned and walked out of the restaurant without looking back, past the two men on the sidewalk who tracked him with their eyes and nothing else, and into the street. The evening air was cool and carried the sound of traffic and distant music. He walked the 2 blocks back to the sedan at a pace that suggested nothing, got behind the wheel and sat for a moment before starting the engine. Then he picked up the encrypted satellite phone from the center console and dialed. Colvin, it's Voss. I've got a picture forming and you're not going to love it, Voss said. I rarely do, Colvin said. What have you got? The shipment is real. Heavy cargo, Russian-speaking escort, military-grade operation. It came through 4 days ago, not 3, moving east. Lugo says it went toward Transnistria and possibly through it. He also says this isn't a one-time move. Whoever is behind it plans to use the corridor again, Voss said. The line was quiet for a moment. Transnistria, Colvin said. Yeah, Voss said. All right, get back here. Whitlock's been pulling threads on his end too, and I want everybody in the same room when we put this together, Colvin said. On my way, Voss said. He ended the call, started the engine, and pulled out into the evening traffic. The city moved around him, indifferent to what had just been discussed in a restaurant in its old quarter, and Voss drove west toward the border with a set of facts in his head that were getting heavier by the hour. Chapter 3. Voss made it back to the airstrip by midnight, and the debrief ran until 2 in the morning. The 6 of them gathered around the metal desk with the map spread between them, the bare bulb overhead casting the same flat light it always did. And Voss laid out what Lugo had given him piece by piece while Whitlock walked them through the signals picture he had been building for the past 18 hours. When both accounts were on the table, Colvin stood back and let the room look at it. The picture was incomplete, but it had a shape now. A heavy cargo, almost certainly one or more of the stolen warheads, had been moved through Moldova 4 days ago by a professional team with Russian-speaking personnel and resources that exceeded anything a criminal network could field. The cargo had gone east, likely through Transnistria, and the encrypted signal Whitlock had been tracking was consistent with a communications network supporting that movement. Lugo's warning that the corridor would be used again meant this wasn't a single transit, it was infrastructure. Nobody said anything for a long moment after the last piece was placed. Transnistria is a problem, Voss said. Transnistria is a lot of problems, Colvin said. But it's also an answer. If they're routing through a region with an existing Russian military presence, they've got cover that we can't touch without creating an international incident on top of the one we're already trying to prevent. So what do we do? Delgado asked. We need more, Colvin said. We need names, routes, destinations. Voss, can Lugo get us anything on the Transnistria side? Voss shook his head slowly. Lugo's reach stops at the border. He was clear about that. The people who operate inside Transnistria are a different ecosystem, and he's not connected to it, Voss said. Then we need someone who is, Colvin said. Voss looked at the map for a moment, his finger tracing the route from Chisinau east toward the breakaway region. Lugo mentioned that, after the shipment passed through, someone local visited him. A middleman, someone who works the chain between the regional players and whoever is running this. If we can find that middleman, we can work our way up, Voss said. Did Lugo give you a name? Colvin asked. No, but he gave me a location. The man operates out of a market district in the eastern part of Chisinau, near the bus station. Lugo described him as a fixer. Handles logistics for people who don't want to handle logistics themselves, Voss said. Colvin looked around the room. Then that's where we go. Voss, set up the approach. I want eyes on this fixer before we make contact, Colvin said. I'll need Whitlock on comms when I go in, Voss said. It was the first time Voss had made the request directly, rather than having Colvin assign it. Whitlock caught it, but didn't remark on it. He gave a nod and started thinking through the equipment he would need to bring. Knox, you and Milligan are on overwatch. Find positions near the market that give you sight lines on the approach and the exits. Delgado, you're with me in the vehicle. We stay mobile in case this goes wrong, Colvin said. And when has a meeting in a foreign market ever gone wrong? Delgado said. Get some sleep, Colvin said. We leave at dawn. They rolled into Chisinau in 2 vehicles by mid-morning. The sedan Voss had driven the night before, and a van that had been waiting in a garage the contact network maintained on the outskirts of the city. Colvin and Delgado took the van. Voss drove the sedan with Whitlock in the passenger seat, a compact monitoring rig in a bag at his feet that could pick up transmissions within a 3-block radius and record everything that came through the wire Voss would be wearing. The market district sat in a part of the city that hadn't seen renovation money in decades. The buildings were low and close together, their facades stained by weather and exhaust. The ground floors given over to shops and stalls that spilled their merchandise onto the sidewalks. The crowd was thick even at this hour, a moving press of people carrying bags and pushing carts. The air filled with competing smells of fried dough and diesel, and something sweet that nobody could identify. Voss parked the sedan on a side street 2 blocks from the market entrance and killed the engine. Whitlock had the monitoring rig open on his lap, the receivers already live, scanning the local frequencies. Comms check, Voss said, tapping the microphone taped beneath his collar. Whitlock heard it clean through the earpiece and gave a thumbs up. Knox, Milligan, how are we looking? Colvin's voice came through the shared frequency. I've got the north entrance from a cafe across the street. Clear sightline, Knox said. I'm on the south side near the bus station. A lot of people moving around down here, but I can see the approach, Milligan said. All right, Voss, it's your show, Colvin said. Voss checked himself in the rearview mirror, a habitual thing that had nothing to do with vanity and everything to do with making sure he looked like whoever he needed to be. He adjusted his collar, rolled his sleeves to a specific point, and became someone else in the space of a few seconds. The posture changed, the set of the shoulders, even the way his eyes moved. Whatever Voss looked like walking into that market, it wasn't a special forces operative. Back in a few, Voss said. He got out of the car and walked toward the market without looking back. Whitlock watched him until the crowd absorbed him, then turned to the monitoring rig and put on his headset. Voss's wire picked up the ambient noise of the market immediately. The sound was dense and layered, conversations overlapping in Romanian and Russian and something that might have been Turkish, vendors calling out prices, the clatter of commerce happening in the particular rhythm of a place that had been conducting business in the same way for generations. Through it, Voss's breathing was steady and even. Whitlock listened for anything that didn't belong while tracking Voss's position by the audio cues. The change in floor surface as he moved from concrete to the rougher pavement inside the market. The narrowing of the sound as he entered a covered section, the shift in crowd density as voices pressed closer. I'm in the east wing, Voss said, low enough that only the wire would catch it. Stall with the blue awning, 3rd row from the back. Our man is behind the counter. Whitlock adjusted the directional receiver, trying to pick up whatever was happening in that part of the market. The range was marginal at this distance, but he caught fragments. A conversation in Russian between 2 men, one of them behind what sounded like a counter based on the acoustic signature. The other was a customer, their exchange ordinary, something about a delivery schedule for machine parts. The customer left. A pause. Then Voss's voice, this time in Russian, smooth and unhurried. The kind of opening that invited conversation without demanding it. He was asking about logistics services, framing himself as a businessman looking to move product through the region without the usual complications. The kind of inquiry that a fixer would hear a dozen times a week and would know exactly how to read. The man behind the counter responded. His Russian was accented differently than Voss's, heavier in the vowels, carrying the particular inflection of someone who had grown up speaking Romanian and learned Russian as a necessity. He was cautious, but not hostile, asking the kinds of questions designed to determine whether the person in front of him was worth his time or his concern. Whitlock translated in real time, not because Voss needed it, but because the rest of the team did. He keyed the shared frequency and gave them the shorthand. Voss is in, the fixer is cautious but engaging. Standard vetting questions so far. Nothing hot, Whitlock said. Copy, Colvin said. The conversation continued for several minutes. Voss worked the man with the particular skill that had made him invaluable in rooms where trust was a commodity. He offered enough to be credible without giving anything that could be checked. He mentioned Lugo's name without attribution, a reference oblique enough that the fixer would recognize the circle without knowing exactly where Voss sat in it. The fixer's tone shifted, not warmer but more engaged, a door opening by a degree. Then Whitlock heard something on the broader sweep that made him sit up straight. A transmission on the encrypted frequency he had been tracking since yesterday. Same signature, same duration, same protocol. But the bearing was wrong. The previous intercepts had all come from the northeast, consistent with movement through the Moldovan corridor. This one came from the south, from inside the city. Whitlock's hands moved fast, marking the bearing, checking it against the previous plots. It didn't fit the pattern of movement he had been tracking. This was a different transmitter using the same network. Someone else, in Chisinau, using the same encrypted communication system. He grabbed the radio. Colvin, I just caught a transmission on our encrypted frequency. Same protocol, but it's coming from inside the city, south of our position, Whitlock said. The shared channel went quiet for a beat. How close? Colvin asked. Close enough that whoever is transmitting is within a few blocks of us, Whitlock said. Milligan, you're on the south side. Are you seeing anything unusual? Colvin asked. Milligan's voice came back immediately, the edge in it audible. Yeah, actually, I've got two guys who just parked a black SUV across from the bus station. They're not shopping. One of them is on a phone, the other is watching the market entrance, Milligan said. Can you describe them? Colvin asked. Both in dark jackets, fit, carrying themselves like they know what they're doing. The one on the phone has his back to me, but the other one is scanning the crowd like he's looking for someone specific, Milligan said. The bottom dropped out of the situation in the space of 2 seconds. Whitlock looked at the encrypted signal bearing on his equipment, then at the direction of the market from the bus station, and the geometry told him everything he needed to know. Colvin, they're using the network to coordinate. Whoever those men are, they're connected to the same organization we've been tracking, Whitlock said. Voss, get out of there, now, Colvin said. Through the wire, Whitlock heard Voss's voice shift mid-sentence, the register dropping as the social mask came off. He said something brief to the fixer, an excuse or an apology, and the sound of his movement changed, faster footsteps, the crowd noise rising as he pushed through it. Then the fixer's voice came through the wire, loud and sharp, calling out in Russian, not to Voss, to someone else. 2 words that Whitlock caught and translated before they had finished leaving the man's mouth. He's leaving. Voss, the fixer just flagged you. He called out to someone, Whitlock said. Yeah, I heard him, Voss said. His breathing had changed, faster now, the control's still there, but the effort behind it increasing. I've got movement behind me. 2 men coming through the stalls. Knox, do you have eyes on Voss? Colvin asked. Negative, he's still inside the covered section. I can see the north entrance, but nothing past the first row of stalls, Knox said. I'm moving, Milligan said. Milligan, hold position, Colvin said. Cap, if those 2 from the SUV go in through the south entrance, Voss is boxed, Milligan said. A pause that lasted half a second and felt like 5. Go, Colvin said. Whitlock heard it through the wire before anyone reported it. The sound of a collision, a body hitting a wooden stall, merchandise scattering across a hard surface. Voss's breathing spiked and then steadied as he moved through whatever had just happened, his footsteps now at a full run. I'm heading north, Voss said. 2 on me, moving fast. Delgado, bring the van to the north entrance, Colvin said. Already moving, Delgado said. Whitlock kept his eyes on the monitoring rig while his ears stayed locked on Voss's wire. The encrypted frequency burst again, another 4-second transmission, the bearing now directly between the bus station and the market. The network was active, coordinating in real time. They're talking to each other. Another transmission, same network. They're coordinating the pursuit, Whitlock said. Through the wire, the market noise suddenly opened up. The acoustic changed, telling Whitlock that Voss had broken out of the covered section into open air. 2 seconds later, Knox's voice came through. "I've got him. He's out the north entrance moving west. 2 men behind him, 15 yards back, and they're not being subtle about it," Knox said. "I can slow them down," Knox said. "Negative. Too many civilians," Colvin said. "They're gaining on him," Knox said. Voss's voice came through, clipped between breaths. "I'm cutting through the alley past the hardware store. It opens onto the street where the sedan is parked," Voss said. Whitlock looked up from the rig and through the windshield. The alley entrance was visible from his position, a narrow gap between 2 buildings 40 yards ahead. He grabbed the sedan's keys from the center console and started the engine. Then Milligan happened. The sound came through Knox's open channel first, a commotion near the north entrance that resolved into something specific, a crash, a shout, and then the unmistakable sound of someone being hit very hard by someone who was very good at hitting people. Milligan's voice came through a moment later, breathing heavy but satisfied. "The 2 from the SUV just ran into me. Well, one of them did. The other one decided to reconsider his life choices," Milligan said. "Milligan, I told you to go to the south entrance," Colvin said. "I improvised," Milligan said. Voss burst out of the alley at a dead sprint, his composure finally abandoned in favor of pure speed. Whitlock had the sedan rolling forward before Voss reached it, the passenger door already open. Voss dove in, and Whitlock punched the accelerator, the tires barking against the pavement as they pulled away from the curb. In the side mirror, 2 men emerged from the alley 3 seconds behind Voss. They stopped at the edge of the street, watching the sedan pull away, making no effort to pursue on foot. One of them raised something to his mouth, and 4 seconds later, the encrypted frequency burst again on Whitlock's rig. "They're reporting in," Whitlock said. "Let them," Voss said. He was pressed back in the seat, his chest heaving, a scrape along his jaw that was starting to color. "They already know what we look like." "What happened in there?" Whitlock asked. Voss took a moment to get his breathing under control, running a hand across his face and wincing when it crossed the scrape. "The fixer wasn't freelancing, he was a tripwire. The moment I mentioned anything connected to the shipment, he signaled someone. I caught it late. He did something with his hand under the counter, and 30 seconds later, I had company," Voss said. "So whoever moved the warheads has people embedded in the local networks, watching for exactly the kind of inquiry we just made," Whitlock said. "That's what it looks like," Voss said. The radio crackled. "All elements, rally point? Now," Colvin said. Whitlock drove west toward the outskirts, checking the mirrors every few seconds. The streets behind them stayed clear. The encrypted frequency was quiet again, the network having said what it needed to say. Beside him, Voss stared out the windshield at the road ahead, his jaw set, the scrape darkening. He didn't speak for the rest of the drive, which told Whitlock everything about how the infiltrator felt about what had just happened. Voss did not get made. Voss did not get chased out of a meeting by men who had been waiting for him. The silence in the passenger seat was not calm. It was a man recalculating everything he thought he knew about the people they were hunting. They were 20 minutes from the airstrip when Voss finally spoke. "Whitlock," Voss said. "Yeah," Whitlock said. "That signal you caught, the one from inside the city. If you hadn't flagged it when you did, I'd still be sitting in that stall when those men from the SUV came through the door," Voss said. Whitlock glanced over at him. Voss was looking straight ahead, his expression giving away nothing except the fact that he was choosing to say this at all. "Just doing my job," Whitlock said. "I know," Voss said. "That's what I'm saying." They drove the rest of the way in silence, the Moldovan countryside scrolling past in shades of brown and gray, and somewhere behind them, an encrypted network hummed with the knowledge that someone had come asking questions and had been allowed to leave, with the understanding that next time would be different. Chapter 4. They gathered in the cinder-block building, with the door shut and the windows covered, the 6 of them arranged around the metal desk in positions that had already become habitual over the course of 2 days. Colvin at the head of the map. Voss leaning against the wall to his left, arms crossed, the scrape on his jaw now a deep purple that he hadn't bothered to clean. Knox standing back from the group, observing. Delgado sitting on an overturned crate. Milligan on the floor with his back against the wall and his legs stretched out, looking entirely too pleased with himself. Whitlock at his equipment, headset around his neck, notebook open. Colvin looked at all of them for a moment before he spoke. "All right, let's put it together," Colvin said. Voss went first. He walked them through the Lugo meeting from the night before in detail that went beyond what he had given over the satellite phone, filling in the texture that a voice on a line couldn't carry, the arms dealer's body language, the calibration of his fear, the specificity of his warning, then the market, the fixer behind the counter in the stall with the blue awning, the vetting conversation that had been proceeding normally until it wasn't, the signal under the counter and the 2 men who materialized from the crowd with a speed that said they had been staged and waiting. "The fixer wasn't a lead, he was a sensor," Voss said. "Someone put him there to catch exactly the kind of approach I made. The moment I got within range of the shipment, he tripped the wire. Which means the organization has an active counterintelligence posture in the region," Colvin said. "Not just a posture, a network," Voss said. "Lugo is one of the most connected men in Moldova, and these people rolled through his territory without asking permission, and then stationed watchers to make sure nobody came around asking about it afterward. That's not a smuggling operation. That's a military-grade infrastructure play." Colvin nodded and turned to Whitlock. "What do we have from signals?" Colvin asked. Whitlock flipped back several pages in his notebook and laid it flat on the desk beside the map. "The encrypted frequency I've been tracking has transmitted 19 times since yesterday morning. The pattern is consistent. 4-second bursts at semi-regular intervals, heavy encryption, and the bearings show a primary source moving southeast through the corridor at vehicle speed," Whitlock said. He traced the bearing lines on the map with his finger, each one marked with a timestamp in small, precise handwriting. "But the transmission I caught during Voss's meeting was different. Same encryption protocol, same burst structure, but a different transmitter. Stationary, located somewhere in southern Chisinau, within a few blocks of the market. That tells me this isn't one radio moving with the shipment. It's a communications network with multiple nodes," Whitlock said. "How many nodes?" Colvin asked. "At least 2 based on what I've intercepted. But a network like this wouldn't be built with just 2. If they have 1 mobile unit with the shipment and 1 stationary unit in Chisinau, they almost certainly have more along the route. Relay points, command stations, coordination hubs. The architecture suggests someone who planned this corridor in advance and built the communications to support it before the cargo ever moved," Whitlock said. The room was quiet for a moment while that settled in. "There's something else?" Whitlock said. "The Moldovan Customs Intercept. The officer on that frequency mentioned a name when his partner asked who authorized the escort. The audio quality was poor, and I couldn't isolate it cleanly, but I've been running the 3 most likely interpretations against the NSA databases and the open-source intelligence I can access from here." He paused and looked at Colvin. "One of the 3 matches a known logistics facilitator, a man named Gregor Zhelnov, former Russian military, discharged in the mid-90s, reappeared in the early 2000s as a freight and transport coordinator, working the corridors between Russia, Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. On paper, he moves agricultural equipment and industrial machinery. In practice, the CIA flagged him 6 years ago as a suspected facilitator for arms transfers, but nothing stuck. He dropped off the radar about 18 months ago," Whitlock said. Voss straightened against the wall. "Dropped off the radar how?" Voss asked. "Completely. Last known address abandoned, business registrations dissolved, bank accounts closed. Not dead, because there's no record of that either. Just gone. The kind of disappearance that takes planning and resources," Whitlock said. "Or a new employer," Voss said. "That's what I'm thinking," Whitlock said. Colvin stared at the map. His finger found the line of bearing marks that tracked the encrypted signals movement through the corridor, followed it east to where it disappeared past the Transnistrian border, and stopped there. He tapped the spot twice, thinking. "Zhelnov is the facilitator. He's the one who built the corridor, arranged the escorts, produced the paperwork, and stationed the watchers, Colvin said. But he's not running the show. He's infrastructure. Someone hired him to build this, and that someone is the one we need. We go after Zelnov. We get closer to whoever that is, Voss said. If we can find him, Delgado said. 18 months off the grid is a long time, Knox said. It was the first thing Knox had said since the debrief started, and the room gave it the weight that Knox's words typically carried. The sniper didn't waste them, and the ones he chose tended to land where they were aimed. He's right, Colvin said. Zelnov has been invisible for a year and a half. Voss's usual networks don't reach into Transnistria, and mine don't either. NSA doesn't have a current location. We're chasing a man who doesn't want to be found through a region that doesn't technically exist. The quiet that followed was the kind that comes when a team has reached the edge of what its current resources can accomplish. They had more than they'd started with. They had a name, a trajectory, a communications network they could track, and a picture of an operation that was larger and more organized than anyone had expected. But the next step required something they didn't have. Colvin pulled his hands off the map and clasped them behind his back. He stood like that for a long moment, looking at something that wasn't in the room. There's someone who might be able to help us, Colvin said. The way he said it got everyone's attention. Not the words themselves, which were straightforward enough, but the weight behind them. Something careful in his voice that hadn't been there when he was running the tactical discussion. Voss noticed it first, his eyes narrowing slightly. Who? Voss asked. A man I've worked with before, an intelligence operative who's spent the last 20 years running networks in this part of the world. He knows the corridors, he knows the players, and if anyone has visibility into what's moving through Transnistria, it's him, Colvin said. Does this man have a name? Voss asked. He goes by Frank, Colvin said. That's not a name, Voss said. It's the one he uses, Colvin said. Milligan looked up from the floor. So call him, Milligan said. Colvin's expression didn't change, but something in the set of his jaw tightened by a fraction. I've been trying, Colvin said, since before we left. The channels I used to reach him aren't responding. His last known operating area was in eastern Moldova, close to the Transnistrian border, which puts him right in the middle of the corridor these people built. I don't know if that's a coincidence. You think he's compromised? Voss asked. I think he's out of contact, and I don't know why, Colvin said. The distinction mattered, and everyone in the room understood it. Out of contact could mean a dozen things, most of them operational and temporary. A man like Frank, whoever Frank was, would go dark for days or weeks as a matter of routine if the work required it. But Colvin's concern wasn't the concern of someone waiting for a colleague to resurface on his own schedule. It was the concern of someone who knew the colleague well enough to know that this silence was different. How well do you know this guy? Delgado asked. Colvin looked at him, and for a moment, the mask that every team leader wears, the one that keeps private calculations private and uncertainty invisible, slipped by half a degree. Well enough to know that when Frank doesn't answer, something is wrong, Colvin said. He didn't elaborate. The room waited for more and didn't get it. Voss watched Colvin with an expression that said he had additional questions and the awareness that now wasn't the time to ask them. Knox watched Colvin with the quiet attentiveness of someone cataloging information for later use. Milligan and Delgado exchanged a glance. If Frank was operating near the Transnistrian border, there's a chance his communications are on the frequencies I've been monitoring, Whitlock said. Colvin looked at him. He wouldn't use standard frequencies. Frank runs his own systems, custom built, things I've never seen anyone else use. But if he went dark because someone found him, there might be chatter around it, Whitlock said. Can you look for that? Colvin asked. I can pull the archived recordings from the last 72 hours and scrub them for anomalies in the border region. If something happened to Frank near the Transnistrian border in the last few days, there might be a footprint, Whitlock said. Do it, Colvin said. Whitlock turned to his equipment and started pulling up the archive data. Behind him, Colvin addressed the rest of the room. Here's where we are. We have a facilitator we can't find, a corridor we can't enter without exposure, and a contact who may be in trouble. None of those problems get solved by sitting here, Colvin said. He put his hands on the map and leaned forward, his voice settling into the register the team had learned to recognize as the one that preceded a decision. Voss, I want you to work every back channel you have for anything on Jelnov's current location. Don't go through Lugo again. The fixer in the market will have reported back by now, and anyone connected to Lugo is going to be watched. Find another way in, Colvin said. Voss nodded. Knox and Milligan, start planning approaches to the Transnistrian border. I want options for crossing that don't go through official checkpoints. Talk to locals, find the gaps, map the routes, Colvin said. You want us to actually cross? Milligan asked. Not yet, but I want to be able to when the time comes, Colvin said. Delgado, I need you on the vehicle situation. What we have isn't going to cut it if we need to move fast across rough ground. See what the local network can get us, Colvin said. Delgado gave a nod that carried considerably less theatrical energy than his earlier mock salute. The mood in the room had shifted. Whatever levity the team carried as a default had been set aside by the combination of what they now knew and what Colvin wasn't telling them. And Whitlock, Colvin said. Already on it, Whitlock said. Colvin almost smiled at that. Not quite, but the corner of his mouth moved. All right, we've got work to do. I want everybody back here at 1800 with something I can use, Colvin said. The team filed out. Milligan pushed himself off the floor with a groan that was more performance than discomfort. Delgado clapped him on the shoulder as he passed. Knox was already through the door before anyone else had moved, a ghost in a room full of people who were trained to be quiet. Voss stopped at the door and looked back at Colvin, holding the look for a moment that said everything a question would have said, then left without asking it. Colvin stood alone at the map. He didn't move for a long time, his eyes fixed on the area near the Transnistrian border, where the encrypted signal had disappeared, and where a man named Frank had stopped answering. Across the room, Whitlock worked through the archived recordings with his headset on, scanning for anomalies, listening for the shape of something that shouldn't be there. The two of them occupied the same space in silence, each working a different part of the same problem, the bare bulb humming above them. 20 minutes into the scrub, Whitlock found something, a cluster of transmissions on a Moldovan police frequency, concentrated in a 12-hour window 2 days ago, centered on a small town 8 miles from the Transnistrian border. The traffic was elevated well beyond the normal pattern for the area. Multiple units dispatched, references to a disturbance, a vehicle, a fire. The language was vague in the way that law enforcement communications became vague when something had happened that the officers on the ground didn't fully understand or didn't want to discuss on an open channel. Whitlock pulled off his headset. Colvin, Whitlock said. Colvin turned from the map. I found something. 2 days ago, a town called Kaushini, about 8 miles from the border. Police traffic spiked hard for about 12 hours. Multiple units, references to a vehicle fire, and some kind of disturbance. The reporting officers were being careful about what they said on the air, which usually means someone told them to be careful, Whitlock said. Colvin crossed the room to the desk in 4 steps. Kushani, Colvin said. He repeated the name like he was testing it against something he already knew. That's on the road Frank would have used. Is it possible he's there? Whitlock asked. Colvin stared at the equipment for a moment, his expression carrying the particular weight of a man weighing 2 priorities that pulled in opposite directions. The mission said, go east, follow the warheads, find Jelnov, trace the corridor to whoever was at the top. The other thing, the thing that lived behind Colvin's eyes when he talked about Frank, said go to Kaushani and find out what happened. There's one way to find out, Colvin said. He straightened up and headed for the door. Get everybody back in here, Colvin said. We're not waiting until 1800. The end.